The following Pharma Essentia podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and cannot be considered as medical advice. Please speak to a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions.
Hello, and welcome back. My name is Vermeil.
And I'm Josh Bragg.
And this is Season 2 of the PV Pod, Stories from the Marrow.
A podcast about polycythemia vera.
For those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you for dropping in. We are so glad you're here.
This is a podcast about all things polycythemia vera, the science, the lived experience, the caregiver perspective, and a whole lot more.
Whether you or a loved one just received a diagnosis, or you've been living with PV for years, you're in the right place. We've got a lot of really special episodes in store for you, all brought to you by Pharma Essentia.
Thanks, Pharma Essentia. Kay, you know me. I love a podcast. I love an audio story. I love the radio.
You like sound.
Love a good sound. Rain on the window, horses galloping, the Wilhelm scream, the whir of a VHS tape. You remember those?
Are you just gonna list every sound?
I could. I guess what I'm trying to say is I love a good sound, but this season of the PV Pod, we are beyond excited to add video to our episodes.
An image.
The moving picture.
I love an image.
Not to discredit sound.
Of course not.
But you have the option to watch our mouths move as we talk now about PV.
Polycythemia vera.
Trust me, you don't want to miss that on video.
Speaking of things you don't want to miss.
Ooh, our first segue of season 2.
Josh, I would like to introduce you to our first guest of the season.
Hi, I'm Dana. I am 35 years old and I have been diagnosed with polycythemia vera since 2019.
Hi, Dana. It's cool that we get to see her now, too. I love the art that she has in the background. Okay, so we know she has good taste in art, but what else should we know about Dana?
I'm a therapist and I work in a group private practice in the Chicago suburbs, primarily working with kids, teens, and their families.
Ooh, she's a therapist. That's really cool. I bet she has a great insight on living with PV from the mental health side of things.
Spoiler alert, she does.
I knew it.
But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We're going to hear Dana's story right after this quick break.
The first ad break of season 2. So you're learning about PV on the PV Pod, Stories from the Marrow. Now get ready to take the next steps on your PV journey with What's Next PV, an educational site on everything polycythemia vera.
Knowing what's next can help inform the decisions you and your doctor make about the future and is important to your health. What's Next PV can help you understand test results, set goals for the management of your PV, and make a plan to advocate for yourself. Check out www.whatsnextpv.com to learn more. And we're back. Thanks for sticking around.
Okay, so we were just about to hear Dana's diagnosis story. I'm really interested in this. The initial diagnosis can be such an emotional moment, and I wonder how her profession as a therapist could impact that.
Here's Dana on her diagnosis.
So I went in for a routine visit with my primary care physician in 2019, and she noticed that I didn't have blood work completed since 2009. So she decided to run a CBC. Upon receiving the results, she informed me that my platelets were in the 800s range.
Just a reminder, a CBC is a complete blood count, which measures the number of each type of blood cell in your body, as well as your hemoglobin levels and your hematocrit levels.
Dana said her platelets were in the 800 range. What's considered a healthy range for platelets?
150 to 450.
Oh, okay. So Dana's platelet count was pretty elevated.
She then had me repeat blood work again in a couple of weeks with no improvement, and then referred me to a local hematologist who I continued to work with as my primary provider to treat PV. So when I was diagnosed, I was pretty shocked and surprised. For a little bit of background context, I grew up as the healthy sister, while my other sibling, who is my older sister, struggled with numerous serious health-related issues to her physical disability. So my identity as a child was always tied to being the healthy one or the one who didn't have any problems. So when I was diagnosed, I had to grapple with my new identity as someone who now had a chronic blood disorder.
Hearing from Dana that she was shocked and surprised actually is quite comforting in a strange way. I mean, we can be really hard on ourselves for reacting negatively to a diagnosis, but it's a completely natural feeling. Even Dana experienced that, and she's a mental health professional. I appreciate her honesty here.
There's another layer to Dana's diagnosis story as well. Like other people living with PV that we've talked to, she experienced symptoms of PV at a young age, long before she knew it could be PV.
What kind of symptoms? What were they like?
My symptoms at the time were fairly mild and have been present for decades. So I actually struggled with migraines with aura and Raynaud's.
Raynaud's being the discoloration and numbness in your extremities, like your fingers and toes.
Which is a symptom of PV.
Both of which I experienced since I was a child. So my migraines were really atypical. So I just get the visual disturbances, like the light flutters or the visual like flickering within my vision, a lot of light sensitivity, and sometimes it started with my inability to read or just understand things that were spoken to me. So it felt really strange.
How did Dana handle these symptoms as a kid? Did she seek treatment?
I did tell my parents about it as a kid, and they just said, oh, it's just headaches. We get them too, no big deal. And so it was pretty much dismissed as a child, just thinking, oh, I've got this thing. Same with Raynaud's, where my fingers or my toes would like turn white in the cold. Oh, I've got this thing too, completely unrelated to anything that was probable. So I just thought these things happened spontaneously. So it was really interesting because my symptoms really didn't present themselves, and I really never attributed anything I ever felt or experienced to something that was just beyond the symptom that I experienced. I also do wanted to add that in my younger years, I did see a rheumatologist who diagnosed my Raynaud's, but I assumed that, again, it was something spontaneous.
So Dana's been experiencing these symptoms for a long time.
Correct.
And she wasn't able to get a diagnosis until 2019. So she just had no idea what was happening to her. That must have been so frustrating.
Interestingly, though, my hematologist issued blood work to test for the JAK2 and other mutations during my initial diagnostic process, which were negative, and then subsequently issued a bone marrow biopsy, which came back positive for the JAK2 mutation. So I feel like my journey's been a little bit more atypical, with my symptoms presenting in early childhood. And then my diagnosis journey was also a bit atypical, with not having the JAK2 mutation detected in my blood work, but otherwise detected in my bone marrow.
It's true. Nobody's journey with PV is the same. I want to dig a little bit deeper into how Dana felt receiving the PV diagnosis. She experienced symptoms for years. She was somewhat dismissed. How did it feel to finally hear what was causing her symptoms?
It was something where it was almost like this light bulb moment of, oh, like maybe these things are actually PV and not just these spontaneous things that happened as a child. I wonder what things would have been like if they were investigated more thoroughly. Because looking back at my pediatric records, my blood work was elevated since I was 4 or 5. I had my platelets in the 500s for, that many years between, 1994 and 1995 to 2019, when they were then in the 800s, and nobody thought about it.
I can't imagine presenting symptoms so early, even having elevated platelet levels and then having to wait over a decade to finally get an answer about what's going on.
I thought that too. I asked Dana how that felt. I was thinking maybe she felt a little relieved.
I'm not sure if it was a relief, because I just didn't know what was going on. It was like, oh, okay, now I know what it is. So in one way, I guess it could be a relief because I knew that I could do something about it. I was feeling like possibly there's something I could do to alleviate these symptoms or get ahead of whatever this thing might be. I'd rather have the knowledge than not have the knowledge. So that was my take once I was diagnosed.
I'd like to pivot a little bit, if that's all right with you.
Pivot away.
Dana's a little bit younger than our usual guest with PV.
Astute observation, Josh. Her doctor thinks so too.
She actually calls me a pediatric patient, which is really funny. He's like, if you're under 40, you're a baby.
As a 39-year-old, I can't help but agree. 40 is the new 20.
What does that make me if I'm 30?
An infant. Now, jokes aside, let's get into this. What's it like for Dana being a younger person living with PV?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of differences when you're younger. I feel like you have to live with this for many more decades, right? So that's the biggest difference, is someone diagnosed in their 20s or 30s or 40s will live with PV for hopefully 40 or more years than somebody who is diagnosed in their 60s or 70s who might live for 20, which, not to say 20 isn't long enough, because we hope that older patients also have adequate treatment options to prevent disease progression. But there are more risks for younger patients for disease progression at a younger age, because your body and your bone marrow is going through a lot of mutation at a younger age than it would be if you were older and diagnosed. So I think that those are some critical differences, as well as the medications that are offered and also recommended. Those are often different for younger patients than they are for older patients. I did a lot of research initially just with looking at scholarly articles, looking at other countries and their research that they've done on PV and other treatments, especially for younger patients, because there are some treatment options that are indicated for younger patients and not for older patients and vice versa. So I really knew what I wanted just based off of the research that whatever other data was out there. What I've learned primarily is that self-advocacy is key. For context, also, I was initially placed on a watch and wait approach due to my younger age and general good health, but I didn't really want to wait for something bad to happen in order to get ahead of my PV. Instead, I researched treatment options, I shared my ideas with my hematologist, and I started on a long-term treatment that felt right for me within 2 years of getting diagnosed. And I've been on that treatment now for 3 years, and I really can't imagine what my daily life would look like if I didn't self-advocate.
This is something I've really loved about all of our guests. They're so active in advocating for themselves, for their treatment plans, and for forming their healthcare teams.
Right. I really want to draw attention to how Dana was originally put on a watch and wait approach, which made her uncomfortable, so she advocated for herself and brought her own research to her hematologist. I feel like so many people don't even know that's an option.
It seems like Dana came into her PV journey with a lot of research and education behind her. In other words, she's extremely health literate, which we've talked about being so important in the past. How did that impact her journey and her relationship with her healthcare team?
So that was my hematologist who my primary care physician referred me to initially, who also performed my JAK2 mutation blood work testing and my bone marrow biopsy, and she was the one that diagnosed me with polycythemia vera. She never referred to it as a cancer. She's always called it MPDs, which is like the old, prior to the WHO changing their lingo. So she just said, oh, these are just MPDs, these are blood disorders, these are things that can be treated, not cured. But at that point when I'd done my research, so I already knew what PV was. I knew that in some communities it is, categorized as a chronic blood cancer rather than a disorder, just due to the updated criteria. My doctor never refers to it that way just because it performs so differently than other acute cancers. So she didn't want to scare me. I didn't feel like she was withholding information by not using that word. I just felt like it was more clinically appropriate to my level of need at the time. But she didn't really have to do a lot of psychoed with me. I feel like I knew a lot about it. I knew what PV was at the time. She didn't have to categorize it to me or explain a lot about what PV was or what it would do. I actually came to her with more of my knowledge because she didn't have many PV patients who were my age.
I'm really impressed with how informed Dana got with her diagnosis right off the bat. Does she have any advice for other people who might be recently diagnosed and seeking information?
As someone young with PV, most of my online research at the time reflected on older adults in their 60s and beyond with PV, and there weren't many younger patients I could identify with. I quickly saw a community of young patients like myself through various Facebook support groups and felt much more at peace when I was able to connect with people who shared my experience as a younger diagnosed patient.
It's so funny how everybody brings up Facebook.
It's true. And while it might not be the social media platform du jour, it does seem to be a really active hub for the rare disease space, and especially for polycythemia vera.
So Facebook isn't just for keeping our grandparents updated on our lives.
Or for posting embarrassing statuses as teenagers that we have to delete years later.
Speaking of statuses.
Another great segue. Season 2 is starting off so strong.
What's the current status of Dana living with PV? How does she manage it?
So I'm very grateful that my PV treatment allows me to have many normal days where PV doesn't get in my way, but my biggest personal challenge is worrying about my future as a younger patient who will live with PV for many more decades. I worry about disease progression and research dedicated to focusing on long-term patient outcomes, and this is something that's just really important to me as a younger patient. I feel like my treatment has really helped me really avoid a lot of these worries because my treatment has been keeping my blood counts very stable for the last 2 years, and I've been on it for 3 years. So I don't have to worry much about my blood work. When I get my blood work done at my doctor's office or through a local place just to do my blood work every couple of months, I'm not going in wondering, okay, well, I need another phlebotomy. Is something wrong? Is something out of whack? It hasn't been for over 2 years. So I don't really have those worries because of my treatment.
Well, I'm really glad that Dana's found a treatment that works for her and makes her feel at ease.
Me too. But that doesn't mean she stopped researching.
I mean, I'm always learning. Even though I'm on this treatment that I've been on for the last 3 years, I'm still doing research and I'm still looking at the data for patients who have been on it for a longer period of time to see like, okay, what is the long-term effect? Is that data out there? If it's not out there, how will that be documented and how will that help younger patients?
Like we've said before, with PV, you're in it for the long haul. It really is a journey.
Like that phrase we've heard before, you're going to die with PV, not from PV.
Exactly. So when you're diagnosed, especially when you're diagnosed at a relatively young age like Dana, you have years of living with PV ahead of you, and through those years, science progresses. It's important that your understanding and research regarding PV progresses as well, so you can advocate for yourself.
Is there anything in particular that Dana has her eye on as she does research?
Not exactly specifically at the moment. I'm just always curious whenever there's new data about longevity, when there's new data about allele burdens. I never had mine tested when I did my bone marrow biopsy. It wasn't something that was indicated in my report, but I've read a lot of research showing that, newer treatments do reduce the mutation allele burden, which potentially could lead to maybe a cure in the future, and if not a cure, potentially just feeling like you are in this hematological remission type of state.
It seems like Dana's very independent and self-motivated, doing her own research, coming to doctor's appointments educated and prepared. I'm wondering, what does her support system look like? In conversations with past guests, we've heard over and over again how important it is to have a support system in place, and I'm curious if her job as a therapist influences hers at all.
Yeah, so when I'm in need for personal support, I rely a lot on my husband and my close friends to help me through more challenging moments. Thankfully, I'm doing really well on my current PV treatment and I don't have many challenging days, but when I also look to personally support others, I'm very active on a specific young patient support group, PV support groups, and my specific treatment support group online.
This is a really good point. In your support system, you can receive support, but you can also give it back, which really does strengthen a community. You get a lot more out of it if you contribute as well.
On a day-to-day, I don't talk about PV. I don't think about PV too often unless I'm doing these types of interviews or doing other work related to PV and helping others. So on a daily basis, I just live my life, which I find I'm so grateful for that opportunity because of my treatment. But when I do think about PV, I do get frustrated sometimes. And I am frustrated when I get another migraine thinking, well, my blood counts are all normal. Why is it still happening? Or when I have a Raynaud's flare up, which because it's cold in Chicago, it happens daily in the winter. It's frustrating, but I just deal with it and live with it. But when I do turn to them for support, I just talk. I just say, I'm having a hard day. I'm frustrated. Just listen. Don't give me advice. Don't try to help me because I know what to do, but just listen. And I feel like when people can listen, that is the best type of support. I think it's very critical also for PV patients to have a support system for their best mental and physical health outcomes as well. And it really doesn't matter if your support system is one person, a couple people, or a whole community. When you feel personally supported in your journey, you feel so much less alone and so much more empowered.
I like how clear Dana is with discussing what she needs from the people who are supporting her. Sometimes you don't need advice, you just need a shoulder to lean on. It's okay to make that clear.
Agreed. That's something I do in my own personal relationships. Swinging back to what we mentioned earlier, that Dana's a therapist, I asked her more about mental health in regards to living with PV.
Yeah, so supporting your mental health is absolutely critical when facing a new chronic illness diagnosis. As a therapist, I try to prioritize my own mental health and well-being to be a good role model to my clients, and I also emphasize my own self-care so I can help take care of others. Mental health is so closely related to physical health as well, so I noticed that my blood counts and symptoms worsened when I was more stressed and anxious. For example, I actually gave myself shingles when I was in my diagnosis process because I was so uncomfortable, so anxious, so unsure of what was going to happen. So that clearly freaked me out, and it worsened my physical health condition. And I also noticed my blood counts and my symptoms felt a little bit better when I was more in control. And when I was more supported by my husband and my friends, I felt like my physical health and my mental health both improved. And obviously things got way better when I started my treatment, but there's really no shame in caring for your mental health. And I highly suggest researching therapists who are trained in supporting patients with chronic illness.
That's really interesting, and I feel like we haven't talked about that before. Mental health isn't just mental. It can affect your physical well-being too.
She was so anxious that it gave her shingles. It's so hard to imagine that level of anxiety. Did she mention how she manages that now?
I feel like just educate yourself. I think education is key. It reduces the anxiety of I wonder or I don't know. And I feel like when you have more answers rather than questions, you always feel better.
Knowledge can be so empowering. On top of aiding you in self-advocacy, it can dispel anxiety as you clear away some of the unknowns surrounding your diagnosis.
Does Dana have any last bits of advice that we can leave our listeners with? I'm going to go ahead and guess that she has some really helpful information.
Of course.
Advocate. I mean, I will say this forever, but advocate, advocate, advocate. Don't be satisfied with a watch and wait protocol. I felt like that was something I questioned from the beginning because I was told, just watch and wait. You're okay. You're young. You're healthy. You're this pediatric patient, which I wasn't, right? I'm 35, but I was told just watch and wait. Things are okay. We'll just do therapeutic phlebotomies, which honestly made me feel miserable. I was iron depleted. I couldn't exercise. I couldn't take walks without huffing and puffing. That was my watch and wait. And I was like, no, this really isn't sustainable for me. So I feel like it's really important to research medication options, even clinical trials, if those are an option in your community, and other opportunities with your doctor to get ahead of your PV diagnosis to hopefully avoid disease progression. Also developing a support system, really carefully communicating your diagnosis with family and friends and reaching out for help when you need it is really important as well. I feel like if you could join a community and meet younger patients, I think that is critical, right? It's all about community and getting a sense of connection with other people who share a similar diagnosis and experience, because a lot of people in their 30s and 40s are on a different treatment than people in their 60s and 70s. So if there's an opportunity to connect in person or virtually or otherwise, I would highly recommend doing so.
Kay, what a fantastic episode.
I know. Thank you, Dana, for sharing your insight and advice with us.
And for kicking off season 2 with a bang.
We will be back soon in your ears.
And now in front of your eyeballs.
With stories, advice, information, and more about living with PV.
This is season 2 of the PV Pod, Stories from the Marrow, a podcast about polycythemia vera.
We will see you next time. PV Pod, Stories from the Marrow is produced by Believe Limited and Bloodstream Media and made possible thanks to our sponsor, Pharma Essentia. The PV Pod is hosted by me, Kay Vermeil, and my co-host, Josh Bragg. If you like the show, please share it with anyone for whom it might make a difference and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We'll see you next time.